Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. There were a lot of conversations going on in the foyer outside. And welcome back to those of you joining us online this afternoon. So, we have a packed and busy afternoon, but hopefully a stimulating and enjoyable one. Our next session is called The Future of Democracy and Pluralism. How can we reverse illiberal trends? I'm going to introduce your speakers and moderator, as I've usually been doing. So we are privileged to have Henna Verkunen, Executive Vice President, Tech Sovereignty, Security and Democracy at the European Commission. Joining us online, and I think the connection works now, Alexandra Matvichuk, Head of the Ukrainian Center for Civil Liberties. And Alexandra is also a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, winning that in 2022 for the work of her centre. Joining us as well, we have Dr. Kevin Casasamura, Secretary General, International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Welcome. And with him, Bart Shevchik, who works in public policy at Covington and Burling LLP, but also a non-resident senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Our moderator for this session is Paul Adamson, founder and publisher of Encompass. I'm going to invite you, Executive Vice President, straight to the lectern to give to speak, or you can sit there as you wish, but I think to the lectern. And also, she will have to leave us at 2:30 sharp, so a very busy and packed agenda. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and also welcome back from my side. So after talking about the moving geopolitical environment this morning, I'm very pleased now to introduce the first session of the afternoon, which will discuss democracy and pluralism, as we heard. In 1997, in an article published in Foreign Affairs, Ferd Zakaria presented the rise of illiberal democracy. And this is used to describe a system with competitive elections, but in which checks and balances are weakened due to populistic or authoritarian forces seeking to control key institutions and also to curtail certain freedoms. And now we are facing a pressing threat to democracy, as we see, that we absolutely need to address also, the threat posed by foreign interference and also information manipulation. Democracy is about bringing together different voices in society and finding common solutions. This is at the core of our European project, because authoritarians, they see democracy as a threat. Their regimes seek to erode our citizens' trust in democracy. They do so by stringing different divisions, instrumentalizing our conflicts and also discrediting democratic actors and trying to undermine also free and fair elections. We see this every day with the hybrid attacks waged online and also offline against the EU as a project, but also against EU member states and also our neighboring countries. In addition to its war of aggression against Ukraine, Russia is deploying information warfare tactics that aim to reach deep into the fabric of our societies, spreading false narratives to manipulate our public opinion. Cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, they are combined in influence operations, as we have seen, and they also involve the use of online influencers. We saw this in an unprecedented scale during the general elections in Moldova in September. We saw that Moldova was under very hard pressure, and it was combined, different disinformation campaigns. They were combined, for example, with the massive cyber attacks. This new initiative we made yesterday, the Democracy Shield, sets out now very concrete actions to enhance our capacity to detect and counter foreign interference and information manipulation campaigns, as well as to boost our societal resilience. In this respect, I would like to mention one of our flagship actions, the creation of European Centre for Democratic Resilience. This centre will bring together all the expertise and capacity on situational awareness across our member states and also neighbouring countries. This is the beginning of a long-term evaluative process to ensure that we have the necessary tools to strengthen our collective preparedness. When taking steps today, we should not lose track of the broader picture and the constantly evolving nature of threats. This is where the longer-term perspective is also very essential. In the EU, we are used to plan ahead with the adoption every 7 years a long-term budget. And our next proposal for our next MFF is designed to offer more flexibility across our budget so that Europe has the capacity to act and also react fast when circumstances change unexpectedly. We know that nowadays the multi-annual financial framework we are having now, 90% of our funds, they were pre-allocated when we make the decisions in 2020. And very fast after that, we were facing COVID pandemic, and after that, Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. And we didn't have, and we don't have very much flexibilities in our budget when we have already earmarked 90% of the funds to certain sectors. And that's why now we are proposing much more flexibility in our budget, because we don't know what kind of new challenges we are facing in 2030, for example. So we need to have also some room for maneuver there also in the coming years. Most importantly, when we look also how we are allocating the funds, we are paying much more now attention for competitiveness of European Union, but also to our security. And of course, very important part of that is our democratic participation and civil discourse, and also our civil society organizations, so-called societal resilience, what we can build when we are investing to our human capital in member states. And that's why we proposed the so-called Agora EU program, and it will particularly contribute to enhance our democratic participation and also societal resilience. And for the first time, it brings also together actions in support of free and independent media, and in support of democracy, citizens' engagement, equality, rights and values. Looking beyond the next few years helps us to see what is truly important. We know that there is no democracy without freedom of expression and freedom of information. But to preserve these very essential freedoms, we must look at the whole information ecosystem. Pluralism should not be limited to traditional news media, but also should apply on online world. We need to create a level playing field for all media actors, old and new, to ensure that they all have the same opportunities. At the end of the day, our first line of defense against manipulation attempts is our population. Engaged, informed and empowered citizens and an active civil society, they are the backbone of our democracies. This is why we need to support our media and digital literacy, critical thinking and civic education across the whole population. This is an investment in the future of our democracies. These skills, they empower all of us to make informed choices in our lives and to better detect and respond to manipulation attempts. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I look very much forward to hearing your views, and I pass on the floor to Paul Adamson for kicking off the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Henna, for that. What we're going to do, since the Commissioner has to leave at 2:30, is I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now and make the most of our precious time together. Invite the panel to react to any parts of your opening remarks they would like to react to before they get their own formal slot. And we'll take it from there, okay? If I may, Henna, I'd like to start with what some of you mentioned towards the end about it starts now with the trying to educate citizens, right, to be more aware. Our first line of defense, as you say, is against manipulation attempts. It's our population. They need to be engaged, informed, and empowered. what is the role both of the member states and the European Union more broadly to provide that education and sensitization capacity? I think it's on.
I'm responsible of the technology, so we're going to see if I can open the microphone. Yes. Personally, I see that this is always maybe the most challenging part also when we speak about our resilience, security and competitiveness, because I see that this is very much, of course, based to our education and skills among our citizens. And in the same time, we know that this is, of course, it's competence of member states when we are speaking about educational systems. So, and in the same time, we can't have very strong security or competitiveness if we don't have good quality of education and good digital literacy, also good media literacy. And that's why it's important, of course, that we are coordinating the actions in the European Union level, and we are also exchanging best practices. We have also, of course, certain projects in the European Union framework, also when it comes to digitalization, media literacy, and we are also now launching new projects on that. But of course, we can't touch all the citizens with that. So I see that member states and regions and municipalities, their educational systems, of course, are playing the most important role. And that's why we have to raise awareness and also exchange best practices among the different stakeholders. Also, it's important to involve our industry here, because often the people are already in working life who need also digital skills, for example, and who need more media literacy also to have the tools analyze and critically think also the information they see. But this is, of course, this has to be a very joint effort together with European Union, with our member states, regions, municipalities, educational institutions, and also public sector and industry. So everybody is really needed for that. But I see that this is key for the better future, that the people themselves, we are empowering the people, and they are able also to analyze and critically think the information they see.
So you say that we have to look at the whole information ecosystem, Hannah. Pluralism should not be limited to traditional news media, but also the online platforms. We need to create a level playing field for all media actors. What do you mean by that specifically?
Yeah, we see that our news media is very much under pressure now, and especially because of the digitalization and new online services, many people are not buying newspapers like they used to do, and especially among younger generations, often social media is the main source of news. And of course, we see that this is having really impacts to our society. Of course, if the young generation is just following some influencers on TikTok, and this is like their main source of news, so it's for sure that it's having impact to their thinking and for their ideas about the society and the world. And that's why, of course, it's very important that we are also supporting our media, also to update their services and also to reach audience, also in the era of the digital times. But in the same time, important to really create more level playing field on online world. Now we know that big tech, they are very much also attracting all the advertising there, and so our news media is very much under economic pressure, because people are not paying off the content anymore like they used to do, and also the advertising is going very much to online platforms. And that's why, for example, via our Digital Markets Act, we want to create more level playing field for the digital world, that the gatekeepers, that they can't, for example, block new innovations from the market, and they can't misuse the very dominant market power. I see that this is very important part now when we try to support our media to create more level playing field in digital world. But in the same time, we are also planning to support financially more our news media. So it's new element on the Agora EU program. So earlier we haven't had that kind of tools, also to support our quality journalism and news media.
So a final question from me, Hannah, before I ask the panel to react to your comments. You mentioned yesterday the Commission announced the Democracy Shield. I don't expect you to agree, but a lot of people who responded to the proposal have been rather critical, and they're pointing to essentially if I'm correct, the voluntary nature of the Democracy Shield. No, it's not an obligation for member states to join in. Is that a fundamental weakness, and why is it voluntary? Was that just political expediency?
Yeah, we saw, I think, two kinds of reactions. So some people said that we are really now limiting freedom of speech and freedom of expression with the democracy shield ideas. And some people saw that this is too weak, that we should propose more like a really shield also to protect our democracies. And of course, we have to combine really, because freedom, of course, is very important part of our society and it's really core value of European Union, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. But in the same time, we have to really protect our societies and democracies from information manipulation, from disinformation, propaganda, that kind of efforts. And it's important to have balance here. But the main elements in our democracy shield is very much educating, empowering our citizens to give tools for them, also analyze and make their decisions themselves, but really to support of media, very important part that the people have access also to accurate information, and especially also protection of our democratic institutions, especially electoral processes, super important, and also enforcing our digital rules when it comes to online platforms, because we know that social media is having big impacts also to our civic discourse, and it's very important channel for information, especially during the electoral campaigns, but we have to make sure that online platforms, they are not misused or manipulated during the electoral processes, so we have to also take more efforts in this side. But freedom, of course, is very important value for us, and in the same time we have to balance the actions that we don't want to limit the freedom of expression here, but in the same time we have to protect our democracies.
Thank you, Anna. Alexandra, would you like to respond briefly to what the Commission has been saying in her opening remarks before I give you the floor more formally in a couple of minutes' time?
I have very brief comment. I'm from the country that is bravely resistant to Russian war of aggression. And I know that the war has not just military, but also other dimension as well. Economic dimension, cyber dimension, trade dimension, value dimension, and informational dimension. And in this regard, this war has already crossed the European Union borders, because this is a war for hearts and minds of people. And what we see for current moment, more generally, that people spend more and more time in digital reality, which is overloaded with fake, hate, propaganda. They became extremely vulnerable to external manipulation. They start to lose their ability to make a distinction between lie and truth. And now even people in this one small community have no more a shared sense of reality. Without shared sense of reality, people are not able to do common actions. Without common actions, how we will protect our freedom and democracy?
Thank you. Do you want to respond, Henna?
I think this is, of course, this is very important topic you underlined, and we see it very, very clearly every day that after that, when Russia started full-scale war against Ukraine, they have been massively also increasing different kind of hybrid operations in the European Union. So we see really cyber attacks, different migrations, they have been used as weapons in the borders. So we see sabotage in our critical infrastructure, GPS jamming, now also these drones flying over our critical infrastructure, and of course different kind of propaganda, fake news, and all kind of actions where how hostile actors, they try to destabilize our societies and really put division between the people and create mistrust among citizens. And that's why the role of the citizens is so crucial, that we can strengthen and empower our citizens, and they have the tools also to work together in this. And especially we see that some member states are more under pressure, and especially those countries which are not members of European Union yet, but who are willing to join European Union, they are under massive pressure. And we have to support these democracies, of course, with all our actions.
Kevin, do you have a reaction to the Commissioner's opening remarks?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and thank you, Vice President Virkkunen, for the thoughts and the reflections that you shared with us. My reflection is very simple. I mean, I'm very happy to see a more fully formed version of the European Democracy Shield now, with priorities that I think are the right ones. I mean, what is in there makes eminent sense if you want to protect democracies in Europe. And my only thought is that I would love to see the same level of ambition on the part of the European Union, the same level of ambition when it comes to protecting democracy outside of Europe. I guess this is a recognition of the absolutely irreplaceable and unique role that the EU has in that global struggle for democracy, particularly now that the United States has ostensibly retreated from supporting that struggle. So Europe, and I mean...
You may be making into a question to the Commissioner. You have your chance to speak at the moment. Sorry to interrupt you.
So I guess my question is whether there will be a similar level of ambition when it comes to supporting democracy outside of Europe, and whether we can at least hope and dream that this will get reflected into the upcoming financial framework of the EU.
Apologies for interrupting, Kevin. Anna?
Very good. Of course, this has been always our ambition, that we want to protect democracy all over the world, and it has been always very important for European Union. But we see that nowadays there's not so many partners globally when we speak about democracy and freedom, and these are of course core values what we want to promote globally, and it's important for us to engage also with countries all over the world. And this is, of course, main principle still in our actions, to promote freedom and democracy all over the world. But we see that nowadays, where we are globally, there is not so many partners who are joining our efforts here, but it's still basis for our actions. In the same time, when we look at the global situation, it's also clear that Europe can't be strong enough globally if we are not able to also defend ourselves. And I speak about military and defense, because we see that now the technological race is very hard globally, and security and defense is very much connected to that. And Europe has been very dependent, because we have been always very open for global investments and investors, and our industry has built very global value chains. But we see that these dependencies, they can be weaponized against us, and that's why we are in a very challenging position right now, because we have to really build up our own capacities when it comes to technologies and also defense part, that we are able to defend ourselves and we are competitive, and then we are also stronger to support and promote democracy in the global stage.
And a final quick reaction from you, Bart, please.
Maybe just a quick question in the interest of time. Thank you very much, first of all, for your great remarks. And a question, one of the assumptions of ESPAS and the exercise of foresight is that you try to look into the future and see what different scenarios might arise and how we might get there for the good scenarios, and how do we avoid the bad scenarios. So let's focus on the good scenarios. If you, let's say, look forward 4 years, 5 years from now, how different do you think our democracies in Europe will look as they interrelate with technology? You mentioned that technology can empower citizens, empower our students in schools to make them more informed, better educated. Of course, there are some challenges to technology as well. But if everything goes right and all the decisions are made to make it right, what sort of future can we expect 4 or 5 years from now in terms of technology and democracy?
I think when it comes to democracy, and especially the foreign interference we are now facing, it's crucial, of course, that what is happening in Ukraine. So I see clearly that we have to beat Russians in Ukraine, because so long that when they continue the war there, we see also that they are very aggressively also attacking us all the time. So there's very clear connection to that. But also inside in our societies, of course, we see many very harmful developments there. And especially I'm worried about this, that younger generation, especially younger generation, that they are not reading anymore, and also the educational, I think, often the learning outcomes, they are a little bit going down all the time and not getting better like they should. And also that how we are able also to now work with the technological developments, because we see that now the technology has somehow overtaken many of our citizens, that it's more that the technology is leading, because it should be always, of course, we as a human beings who are in control. But now we see, for example, that some of the services, they are very addictive, and the people are using more and more time online. And now when AI is combined for that, of course, there is clearly risks that people are not thinking themselves anymore, and they are very dependent on technologies, and the technology is like taking the leadership, and the people are not in the controller's place. But that's why I see that it's so important that we are investing in education, and we are making sure that our citizens are also, they are having the tools also to navigate in this very complex world. But I think that we can succeed in that, but of course everybody has to take very seriously now the situation where we are. And I have said it already many times, but I say that very much the education is very much key for a better future everywhere in the world.
Well, okay, we have to let you go. We've had more than a fair share of your time, Hannah, this afternoon. Thank you so much. We'll let you go to your next appointment and release you.
Have a good have a good discussion.
And thanks to the Executive Vice President. And now we go back to the panel, and it's my great personal pleasure to turn back to Alexander to thank you personally, Alexander, for being with us this afternoon. It's not every day we get to talk to a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, that's for sure. Maybe as a first question, maybe you'd like to continue your thoughts, because I had to interrupt you for questions of reasons of time when you're reacting to Hannah's opening remarks about how the information war goes beyond national borders, and maybe the rest of Europe doesn't quite appreciate that because they're so focused on the military aspect of the invasion. Go ahead.
Probably I will start with more general problem, which is fundamental to be solved, because now we are trying to impose just short-term strategy. We have to know the roots of the problem to be able to develop long-term strategy. 80% people in the globe live in non-free or partially free societies. This means that people who have a real right to vote for whom they want to vote, who have a real right to say what they want to say, people who have human rights and freedoms, they are minority. And the problem is not just in fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in developed democracies, people start to put into questions the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And there are reasons for this. The current generation inherited their freedom from their grandparents. They started to take human rights for granted. They became consumers of democracy, and they consider freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that is why we observe the trend in well-developed democracies that during elections, more and more people attend to exchange their freedom for populist claim, for economic benefits, but first and foremost for their own comfort. And in addition to this, people are disappointed with democracy. Yet democracy is not ideal. There are a lot of unsolved problems, for example, social inequality, and we can make a huge list of problems. And people have a right to be angry and disappointed, but authoritarian regimes don't solve this problem either. The only difference is that people have no right to complain. And I think that one of our problems that we start to think that freedom and democracy is a final answer, and we stop to promote it. And we have to explain people that we have to do two tasks parallel to protect our democracy and to perfect our democracy, because we have no alternative. The alternative to our non-ideal democracy, it's a hell of authoritarian regimes. And I know what I'm talking about because just 12 years ago, people in Ukraine were fighting against pro-Russian, corrupt, authoritarian Yanukovych regime. And to conclude, modern authoritarian regimes, they have no common ideology. However, they promote common narratives. They try to present that authoritarianism means stability and strength, and democracy means slowness and ineffectiveness. They attack humanistic ideas like independent court, freedom of the press, human rights. We have to step in this value battle because these decades of freedom, which started after the fall of the Berlin Wall, can very easily change to decades of survival. But the hope is that Europe is not just about geography. Europe is more about values. So we must protect them.
If I may, Alexander, if I understand you correctly, you're describing a phenomenon which does predate by quite some time Russia's full-scale invasion of your country. And there's clearly, as you depicted, a negative trend going on for quite some time. To what extent do you think this trend, a question I will ask other members of the panel, by the way, is this trend irreversible? Is you're always fighting, to use the awful expression, a losing battle?
I think that people in Ukraine are sincerely fighting for freedom because we have never had the luxury to be in comfort. We restored our independence only 3 decades ago. Only 12 years ago, after Revolution of Dignity, we got our chance to build democratic institutions. And in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. So we are doing this for 12 years, not in a peaceful time, but in a time of war. So when I speak about this questioning of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I mostly speak about Western societies, because for decades, Western societies was an example for people from transitional democracy. But now something bad is going on in well-developed democracies. There are a lot of dangerous bells, which probably people there don't know because they have no idea how to live in unfreedom. But we who have this experience, we clearly hear these bells.
Thank you, Alexander. I need to turn now to the other members of the panel and to you, Kevin, after I unfortunately interrupted you, which I hope you will forgive me. You were making the case that, and making the very bold assertion that you were very dissatisfied with the extent to which, if I understand you correctly, the European Union was tackling the illiberalism outside its frontiers, outside the continent of Europe, in fact. So maybe now is your opportunity to amplify and develop your argument, please.
No, I'm not dissatisfied. No, quite to the contrary. And I recognize, I acknowledge the importance of the role that the EU has been playing in the recent past in supporting democracy. And it's precisely because I acknowledge that I would like to see that reflected in the work of the EU going forward. Because, and the international context has changed in a dramatic way when it comes to supporting democracy with the retreat of the US. So whatever Europe has been doing to support democracy over the recent past, it's even more essential now than it was, number one. And I guess, I would add that this is also fundamental because the EU cannot see itself as a garden of democracy surrounded by a sea of authoritarianism in different hues. That's not a sustainable future. So whatever happens outside of Europe matters for Europe, of course. My second point, if you allow some interaction between the panelists, I fully agree with Alexandra in terms of I agree that the case for democracy remains very robust, but I take issue, and it's no more than a footnote, with this assertion that there's no alternative to democracy. Be careful with that, because in the eyes of a lot of people, the perception is that there are alternatives to democracy in a way that was not the case 30 years ago. And to the extent that we claim that there's no alternative to democracy, we abandon the task of winning the discussion. And we need to win the argument. Because for a lot of people, this is not obvious. You know, I just flew in last night from India. And believe me that there's a very robust argument there as to whether the niceties of liberal democracy are applicable to a country, even to a country like India. So we have to be careful with the notion that there's no alternative to democracy. I mean, I understand the feeling behind this assertion, but we have to be careful with that.
Right. Your organization produces an annual, or certainly a regular report, Global State of Democracy. Your latest edition came out in September. I'll quote briefly one of the findings, and quote, in 2024, 94 countries, representing 54% of all countries assessed, suffered a decline in at least one factor of democratic performance compared with their own performance 5 years earlier. From that, do you extrapolate that this decline in democracy is a long-term trend? And the question I more or less asked to Alexandra in a slightly different context, is this trend irreversible?
Look, I mean, the erosion of democracy globally is a case of a death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, I could give a long list of factors that are contributing to what's happening. I'll pick 2 or 3 that I think are particularly relevant. Number one, this is, you know, I could make it very complicated, but I'm going to make it very simple. Social media is playing a toxic role in our democratic health. For many reasons, but I would say that the impact that is having in feeding polarization all over the place is a particularly damaging effect. Not to speak of the role that social media is playing in turbocharging disinformation and the demise of any kind of normal information environment. And it also plays, and has played, a crucial role in eroding trust in institutions, or trust across the board, not just with regards to institutions. And I guess what happens during the pandemic is particularly important in this regard. The shadow of the pandemic is going to be a long one in terms of the erosion of trust across the board. And a lot of that has to do with social media. Number 2, the second factor that I will mention is global inequality. And here, the only thing I'm going to say is that, you know, we tend to repeat this phrase, and I do it as well, that, you know, a big problem in terms of the, you know, the erosion of democratic sentiment around the world is the perception that democracy is not delivering. That is true, but I'll be more precise. A big part of the problem with democracy nowadays is the perception that democracy is not delivering fairness. Right. This is a fundamental problem, and it's a real problem in a world where you have, according to Oxfam, that the richest 1% of the world controls more wealth than 95% of the world. So inequality, global inequality is a huge part in this story. And finally, the fundamental change in the international context. I think compared to, say, 30 years ago, the attempts on the part of authoritarian leaders or would-be authoritarian leaders to erode democratic practices, to do away with them, is met with impunity today in a way that was not the case 30 years ago. Can this change? Can this be reversed? I think it can, and it has in a few places, almost always as a result of key elections. Places like Poland, like Brazil, like Guatemala, like Senegal. That's the good news. The not so good news is that once the virus of populist authoritarianism has afflicted your political system, is there to stay. So no victory appears to be final. So in this cases where democratic forces prevail in an election, that's no kind of final victory, and what ensues is a twilight struggle in which there will be progress and there will be a lot of reversions as well. I mean, we're seeing that playing out in real time in a country like Poland.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We've talked about democracy on the continent of Europe outside the EU's borders. We talked about democracy more globally outside the EU. I'd like to ask Bart now about democracy within the EU's borders. I mean, I think it was Jim Close this morning who said the EU has an unfortunate predilection sometimes to preach to other countries about values, democratic values, human rights, etc., etc. How would you assess the EU's own report card in terms of its own internal democracy at the member state level? Over to you.
Sure, thanks, Paul. And thanks, obviously, to the organizers for putting this together. And let me also commend one of the foresight papers that was prepared as part of this conference on the future of democracy, a nice, crisp 28-page document produced by the Council's analysis and research team. And it provides a great overview of the state of play of democracy across the globe and in Europe. And the good news, actually, that Europe right now, according to Freedom House and according to the Council's paper, is the freest region in the world. So at least good news for Europe, not so good news for the rest of the world. But I think one advantage that Europe and the EU have is that it's actually a very, if you think about it, it's a very decentralized political system with so many veto players, so many decision makers, sometimes perhaps a few too many if you want to get things done. But in fact, what that ensures is that you don't get huge swings from one extreme to another. And because most decision-making of key importance in Europe is by consensus, that whatever the EU adopts ends up sticking. And so you do have a certain sustainability to the political system that the EU has almost magically put together. You know, that sort of reflects in the outcomes as reported by the Council's paper and by Freedom House. The other sort of advantage is that, you know, depending on your political spectrum, you might win elections here or lose elections there. Maybe your party is in the majority or in the plurality in the European Parliament, or maybe not. But there are lots of different spaces in which you can try to seek your political preference heard. And there's lots of opportunity for political competition at the local, national, European level. And so, you know, in some ways, Europe has sort of inherent competitive advantages to ensuring that it can be one of the freest regions in the world. Now, that's the good news. The other point that I think needs to be made is that this can be very fragile. And even if that's the state of play right now, there's no guarantee that that holds into the future. And the future of democracy in Europe very much depends on the outcome of the conflict in Ukraine and whether democracy is preserved in Ukraine or not. And that obviously is a much broader question that's been discussed throughout this conference already, as well as other fora. But, you know, it's tough to overemphasize how important the struggle is in Ukraine, because it's not about only, you know, ensuring that you don't have additional Russian drones in European skies or Russian assassins across European territories. But then, the flood of Russian propaganda, misinformation, and so forth, election interference at a much larger scale if we do not prevail in the with Ukraine, alongside democratic Ukraine against Russia, the future of democracy in Europe would look a lot different if we don't prevail in this fight. And then finally, maybe just in the interest of time, let me close with one other point that, a lot of times people, average citizens, policymakers, look to institutions to sort of provide the safeguards, either our legislatures or our political parties or our judicial systems. And all of those obviously have a very important role in our rule of law system, in our democratic interworkings. But fundamentally and ultimately, it rests on sort of inherent virtues in decision makers and policymakers, as well as citizens. There's a famous line by one American jurist, Learned Hand, when he was talking about the spirit of liberty and how so long that liberty lies in the hearts of men and women, and if it dies there, no constitution, no court, no law can save it. And if it sort of is alive there, if it sort of is vibrant in the hearts of men and women, then it doesn't really need much by way of constitutions and courts and legislatures to help it. And what you see in Ukraine is a concrete illustration of that principle, that Alexandra and all of her Ukrainian brethren know precisely the difference between democracy, as imperfect as it may be, because they live and breathe the spirit of liberty and the spirit of democracy. Because for Ukrainian citizens, the choice is incredibly stark. It's either that or the hell that Alexandra pointed to. And so I think we need to keep this in the back of our mind that, ultimately, yes, it's about the systems that we have empowered or challenged by technology and other factors, but ultimately it also relies on all of us, from the policymakers down to the individual citizens, to make sure that we have this spirit of liberty and democracy in us, and that we do our utmost to try to defend it.
A very quick follow-up question, because I want to leave a few minutes. I'm told only 7. It's a bit unfair since we started a bit later, to the audience. Again, looking ahead, you mentioned 2040, which is the broad theme of this conference, and it's another way of maybe asking the irreversibility question. Are we in the West, of the victims of all this election interference, to be very specific, destined always to be on the back foot? Or do you see any kind of, even if they're very embryonic, encouraging signs that we know these things are happening all the time, but we somehow seem to be rather more reactive, which may be a very unfair comment on my side. But do you see any signs that we're getting better at this and we're getting more on the front foot as opposed to the back foot?
I think so. I mean, look, it's clear that Russia has lost all of its, or has not accomplished any of its strategic objectives in Ukraine, notwithstanding all the men and material that's thrown on the Ukrainian battlefields. And it's been the heroism of, first and foremost, the Ukrainian troops, Ukrainian citizens, but also, the support of Europe and European leaders, European citizens. You have something like 200 billion euro that's already been committed by Europe and European member states to Ukraine, another 100 billion pledged. You recall, scenes in the Warsaw train station in March and April of 2022 when Ukrainians were fleeing the immediate conflict. Average Polish citizens would leave their strollers and diapers and foodstuff on the platforms of the train station so that as people were coming in, they could at least have the basic necessities as they went on to seek shelter and some long-term integration. And in fact, now, you have a fight in Germany and in Poland and others for Ukrainian refugees to stay in those countries because they're contributing so much to the local economies and to the local workforce.
But
And so in some ways, we're doing better than I think we would have been expected. And the illiberals, the autocrats, I think are on the back foot.
Forgive me again for being so rude. It's becoming a habit. I'm going to ask all the panelists at the end to have 30, 40 seconds to final remarks. So before I do that, we have a precious 5 minutes to ask questions from anybody in the audience who'd like to ask a question, a very brief question. Looking around the room, maybe we don't need those 5 minutes. You, sir, I would ask you to give your name, organization, a very brief question, sir, if you wouldn't, and if it's directed to one person on the panel as opposed to all three, that'd be very useful as well. Over to you, sir. Wait for the microphone, sir.
What is the time to act? Do we have time in the future to stop this post-truth society?
I would nominate Alexandra to answer. Did you hear that question, Alexandra, from the gentleman? I'll give that to you.
The honest answer, I don't know. There are different scenarios. And all my experience to work with consequences of mass violence during authoritarianism or during the war lead me to insight that the collapse of international system of peace and security was preceded by collapse of ethics. And probably it's very obvious because how we see the world will define our decisions and our actions and will create one or that scenario future. What do I mean? We start to interpret very differently never again slogan. For Ukrainians, never again means that we will never again tolerate evil. We will fight with it. We will say never again to concentration camps, to erosion of identity, or to physical extermination of entire nation, to torture and to rape. We'll fight for the slightest chance for our children to live without fear of violence and have a long-term perspective. And this is not just words. We are proving it on the battlefield. But for Western societies who inherited their freedom from their grandparents, who start to take security for granted, never again means completely different things. For them, never again means that I would never again want to pay high price for freedom. Even if my life is under the stake, I would never again want to risk them. And this pattern of behavior can lead to different type of future. So I don't know whether or not we have time to explain people that, yes, we have no alternative, because it's not about rational arguments. People are irrational. I speak about the concrete feeling. What does it mean to live in gray zone when you have no tools how to defend your rights, your freedom, your property, your lives, your children, your beloved ones from the will of authoritarian leaders?
Thank you, Alexander. I'm going to use the precious 2 minutes left to invite everybody on the panel to have 30, 40 seconds maximum. Some maybe parting message you would like to leave the group in this room and not watching us online. And I'll reverse order this time, starting with you, Bart.
Well, just briefly, I think it's important to keep the faith and not lose hope, to somehow think that there's an overwhelming historical trend against us. Look, these things, you need to take the long-term view and play the long game. And I think, if you sort of look out over the next decade, several decades, so long as we do what we need to do, chances are that we will be able to succeed. There's a virtue of necessity in a way where we don't really have a choice because if we don't succeed in Ukraine and helping Ukraine defend itself and the free world against Russian aggression, then we'll be living in a completely different world. Freedom House will be writing a completely different state of play on democracy in Europe, and I think we need to keep this image in the back of our mind.
Thank you, Bart. Over to you, Kevin.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions and the comments. I mean, two things. I mean, number one, a key takeaway from this discussion is that information is a key battlefield where the future of democracy will be determined in such a way. And I have to think that unless and until we correct the madness that we've created through social media that is completely obliterating any kind of healthy information environment where democracy can thrive or even survive, is going to be an uphill battle. And number two, the fundamental case for democracy remains very, very strong. That, at least for me, is not in doubt. What has been thrown into doubt is this notion that we had 30 years ago when international idea was created, by the way, and is very much a child of that assumption that that we had in the 90s, that the global expansion of democracy was inevitable and irresistible. That's plainly untrue, and we know better now. And that's why we have to fight for democracy every day, because its expansion is not inevitable.
Thank you. I see a common theme emerging. And a final word to you, Alexandra. Over to you.
I just want to finish with these words of hope. I think we have to define the hope properly. Hope, it's not a confidence that everything will be fine, but hope, it's a huge understanding that all our efforts have a huge meaning.
Thank you so much. Wise words indeed, and a wonderful moment to take our leave of this discussion. I hope you've enjoyed it, and the audience are watching online. You have one small task, but an important task is to show your appreciation with a round of applause for our panel.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much.
It's a thankless task.
Thank you very much to our last panel there, to Paul for moderating, to our Executive Vice President, to Bart, Kevin and Alexandra for joining.